Welcome to Dead Quiet Mysteries, the place where every cold case, chilling crime, and unsolved mystery is brought back to life. From vanished persons to twisted betrayals, we dig deep into the unknown to uncover the truth that others left buried. Before we begin, drop a comment and tell us which city and country you're watching from. We love seeing how far the mystery travels. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell icon so you never miss a case. Because here, some truths are only heard in the dead quiet. Hercule Poirot and the Belladonna Trap. Chapter 1. Invitation to the Hour. It was one of those late May mornings in London when the rain no longer threatens but lingers, brushing pavements with the lightest of mists. I, Captain Hastings, was seated near the fire in our modest Baker Street lodging, immersed in the Times crossword and sipping a lukewarm cup of tea when the morning post arrived. "Mon ami," came Poirot's precise and amused voice, "how curious it is that you expend such energy on a puzzle with no criminal motive behind it." I looked up with a grin. "Crosswords keep the mind agile, Poirot." "Perhaps," he said, taking a letter from the silver tray Mrs. Hudson had placed on the table. "But for true agility, one must stimulate the little grey cells with something more dangerous." His eyes narrowed as he inspected the envelope. Thick cream paper, wax seal with the initials IL, and an unmistakable scent of lavender. "Ah," he murmured, "a woman of taste and trouble." "Who's it from?" Poirot cracked the seal with a flourish and read silently for a moment, his brow furrowing with increasing interest. "Mrs. Isadora Langford of Lavender House. A name you may not know, Hastings, but one that once fluttered the hearts of half the Royal Horticultural Society. She is a widow now, wealthy, sharp as the pruning shears she once sketched in her botanical books. And what does she want with you?" Poirot held the letter toward me. "Monsieur Poirot, I trust you remember me, though many years have passed. I find myself in the most delicate of predicaments, one which I believe only your unique insight may unravel. I suspect I am in danger, and though I cannot say how, or why exactly, I feel something is amiss at Lavendour House. Should you wish to assist me, I invite you to join our weekend gathering. We serve tea precisely at 7 o'clock, as always, during the Lavendour Hour. Yours, with anticipation, Isadora Langford." I raised my eyebrows. "Lavendour Hour?" Poirot steepled his fingers. "A romantic invention of hers. It refers to the hour just before dusk when the skies above her estate turn the colour of her prized French lavender. She hosts her evening teas then, an elegant tradition, and it seems perhaps the stage upon which some darkness now hovers." "Shall we go then?" Poirot smiled faintly. "But of course, there is nothing more invigorating than a mystery that presents itself wrapped in civility and scented paper. Let us make arrangements at once." We arrived at Lavendour House on a Saturday afternoon. Nestled in the Surrey countryside, the estate was every bit as grand as I had imagined. Ivy-clad walls, symmetrical gardens in perfect bloom, and rows upon rows of lavender bordering the long drive like a perfumed army. A uniformed manservant opened the front door before we had even rung. He led us through a cool, marbled hall into a drawing room that felt both elegant and oddly subdued. The walls were pale rose with dark wainscoting and portraits of Langford ancestors, stern men, and veiled women with impossible necklines. "Mr. Poirot, Captain Hastings," came a voice behind us, low and composed. We turned to find Mrs. Isadora Langford standing in the doorway. She was tall, with silver hair swept up into an elegant knot, her dark green dress perfectly tailored. Her expression, however, was one of fatigue held barely in check. "Madame Langford," said Poirot, stepping forward and bowing slightly. "It is a pleasure, though I regret the necessity." "You are most welcome," she replied. "I knew you would come. When one has lived as long as I have, one recognizes true intelligence, even in youth. You have aged with restraint, Mr. Poirot." Poirot inclined his head with a twinkle. I take that as high praise. Now perhaps you would tell me what troubles you? Not here, she said quickly. Not yet. You must meet the others first. It would arouse suspicion otherwise. She gestured for us to follow. I have gathered a few of the usual faces for the weekend. It is my birthday tomorrow, and tradition demands I host at least one annual event, though I find I enjoy them less with each passing year. We were taken to a sun-drenched parlour that opened onto the west garden. A set of French doors had been propped open to let in the fragrance of the lavender fields beyond. Inside, 4 guests were gathered. A man of military bearing and sun-browned face stood to greet us first. "My brother-in-law," said Isidora with a hint of coolness, "Colonel Reginald Ashcombe." "Poirot," the colonel said, shaking hands firmly. "Heard of you. Don't like mysteries, personally. Always better to face things square on." "And this," Isidora continued, "is Miss Beatrix Lorne, our resident flower enthusiast and photographer." Beatrix, a young woman with chestnut curls and sun freckles, nodded brightly. "Delighted! I've seen your name in the papers. You once solved that case with the poisoned teas in Sussex, didn't you?" Poirot smiled modestly. "Ah, yes, a case of mistaken affection and mislabeled chamomile. And of course, you must meet my daughter, Eleanor." Eleanor Langford was seated by the window, hands folded neatly in her lap. She rose as we approached, but smiled only faintly. She had the kind of beauty that seemed to flicker rather than shine. Eyes too deep, a smile too guarded. "Mr. Poirot," she said softly, "Mother has always spoken highly of you." "And finally," Isidora said, "Dr. Felix Merrow, our trusted physician and friend." Dr. Merrow was perhaps in his early 50s, lean and silver-haired, with a calm, courteous air. His handshake was dry and firm. "Always good to have you here," he said to Poirot. "Though I rather hope you won't be needed." "Do not worry," Poirot replied mildly. "I am quite used to not being needed, until suddenly I am." The group exchanged pleasantries, but I noted an odd undercurrent, hesitations, glances, an unfinished sentence here or there. Beatrix laughed too loudly. Colonel Ashcombe refilled his glass too quickly. Eleanor hardly spoke at all. At length, Mrs. Langford checked her watch. "You must be tired from your journey. Your rooms are prepared. Tea, of course, is at 7 sharp in the garden." "The Lavendour Hour," Poirot said. Isidora gave a thin smile. "Yes, it has always been a beautiful tradition, but lately I fear it is poisoned." Poirot's expression did not change, but I knew that phrase had caught his attention like a hook in the water. Later, in our guest room, a well-appointed chamber with views of the distant greenhouse, Poirot unpacked his valise with precise care. "Well, Hastings," he said, adjusting his cravat in the mirror, "do you observe what I observe? Only that this house is rather full of unsaid things." "Ah, but that is precisely it. Everyone smiles with their lips and frowns with their eyes. Madame Langford fears something, but the others, they suspect something already. And that, my friend, makes this weekend très intéressant." As the bell rang faintly below stairs, calling us to tea, Poirot patted his moustache and turned toward the door. "Come, Hastings, let us see what shadows lie beneath the lavenders." Chapter 2. Shadows in the Garden. The grounds of Lavender House unfurled with the kind of cultivated elegance that hinted at generational care. The west garden, in particular, seemed sculpted for both admiration and concealment. Lavender rows stretching like sentries, stone paths vanishing into arches of wisteria, and a low sun tinting the air with golden haze. The famed Lavendour Hour was moments away, and though the air was balmy, I sensed a stillness beneath the beauty, as though the house itself were holding its breath. Poirot and I made our way down from the upper landing. He had changed into a light grey suit with a soft lavender tie that somehow echoed the surroundings. His polished shoes barely whispered against the staircase. "You note, Hastings," he said mildly, that this house is a place of carefully arranged beauty, both outside and in. But beauty, my friend, can serve to distract as easily as it can to please. In the parlour, the party had begun to reassemble. A silver tea service had been laid out on an iron table beneath a pergola in the garden. The scent of warm lavender mingled with the faintest trace of rosewater drifting from Isadora Langford's wrists as she joined us. She wore deep plum silk, her posture straight, despite a slight fatigue in her gaze. Colonel Ashcombe emerged with a glass of whisky already in hand, his stride stiff but purposeful. "Damned formal, these teas," he muttered under his breath. "Still, she insists on ceremony." "Tradition can be quite revealing," murmured Poirot as we followed the group outdoors. The garden was dappled in amber light. Chairs had been arranged in a semicircle, and a low table bore cordial decanters, porcelain cups, and a tiered tray of almond biscuits and raspberry tartlets. At 7 precisely, Mrs. Thorne, the housekeeper, struck a small brass bell beside the glass-house door, signalling the start of the tea. Dr. Merrow took his seat beside Eleanor Langford, who barely acknowledged him. Her hands were folded over her lap, unmoving, her eyes resting not on the guests, but on the middle distance, towards the greenhouse, where glass panes caught the dying sun like fragments of stained glass. Beatrix Lorne, who had been photographing wild bees in the hedgerow earlier, arrived last, flushed and breathless. "Apologies," she said brightly. "The light was too good to ignore. The bees were hypnotic." She seated herself beside me and whispered, "You've noticed it too, haven't you?" "Noticed what?" She tilted her head toward the family. "Everyone's pretending too well, that's the problem." Before I could respond, Mrs. Langford rose. "I thank you all," she began, her voice clear despite its delicacy. "This weekend is not merely to mark the day of my birth. It is, I fear, the marking of a transition. I have revised my affairs recently, and while all shall be disclosed in due course, I wanted to spend these twilight hours with those who remain dear to me." A pause followed. Beatrix smiled gently. Eleanor's lips tightened. The Colonel stared down at his glass. Dr. Merrow glanced at the sky. "Let us drink to legacy then," said Isadora, raising her glass. "To remembrance and to honesty." "To legacy," echoed the others, though not quite in unison. Poirot observed the toast with an expression of gentle interest, his gaze flitting, not to Isadora, but to the glasses, to Eleanor's rigid fingers, to the shadows slipping through the lavender rose. As the evening advanced and the final slivers of sunlight pulled back into the horizon, the guests dispersed into pairs and drifted through the garden. Eleanor wandered alone, her hands trailing over the lavender tips, eyes distant. Colonel Ashcombe retreated toward the stone bench near the sundial with a fresh drink. Beatrix resumed her photographs, capturing the shifting hues of dusk. Dr. Merrow and Isadora remained seated, murmuring quietly. Poirot motioned for me to follow him down a side path flanked by tall cypress trees. We strolled slowly, the hush of evening deepening around us. "You see how carefully the theatre has been arranged, Hastings?" Poirot murmured. I frowned. "The garden?" "The entire tableau, the toast, the hour, the symbolism. Madame Langford is a woman of precision, but something, how do you say, rattles the calm. Did you observe Miss Eleanor's reaction to the word honesty?" Her hand twitched. And our friend, the Colonel, his scowl was not merely due to the sun. "And Dr. Merrow?" Poirot's moustache twitched. "He is a man skilled in composure, yet he flinched ever so slightly when Madame mentioned revising her affairs. Curious, no?" We paused as a bird startled from a hedge. I turned, thinking I saw movement beyond the trellis, but found nothing. As we resumed walking, Poirot stopped beside a bronze sundial shaped like a coiled serpent. He knelt and inspected the base. "Hastings," he said softly, "observe." A narrow groove had been etched into the soil near the stone. Not quite a shoe print, too faint, but more than animal. "Someone waited here recently," he said. "Perhaps last night." The ground is dry, yet disturbed. The direction faces the glass house. When we returned to the parlour, Mrs. Langford had retired early. Dr. Merrow claimed she was experiencing a mild headache. "A quiet evening will help," he said. "She's been under strain, understandably." "Indeed," Poirot replied. "I find a headache often precedes revelation." Beatrix tapped me on the shoulder. "Would you care for a walk in the orchard before supper?" I was about to decline when Poirot gave me a slight nod. "Allez, mon ami, enjoy the charm of youth and bees." We left the parlour and followed the gravel path to the orchard. The trees were just beginning to bear fruit, their white blossoms now giving way to pale green promise. The air had cooled. Beatrix walked briskly ahead before pausing beneath a bough. "I saw someone last night," she said quietly. "Just after midnight. I'd gone to fetch my scarf from the garden bench and saw a figure, hooded, I think, carrying a lantern near the greenhouse." "Did you see who it was?" She shook her head. "Too far, and they moved quickly. But they dropped something. I tried to look in the morning, but nothing was there." "Why didn't you say anything before?" "I wasn't sure what I saw. It could have been a servant. But now—" She looked back toward the house, her expression unreadable. "There's something wrong here, isn't there?" I hesitated, uncertain how much to share. "There may be," I admitted. "But if there is, Poirot will find it." She smiled faintly. "Good, because I think someone's trying very hard to keep something buried, and twilight is when it almost feels possible to lie and be believed." As we returned to the house, the last of the Lavendour Hour faded into darkness. Chapter 3. Death at Twilight. The morning air at Lavendour House carried the cool crispness of early summer. Dew clung to the lavender rose like silver threads, and the skies, brushed with soft grey, held the promise of a gentle day. Yet beneath the estate's picturesque calm, something taut had settled, a tension like stretched silk. I rose early and descended to the garden alone. The sun had only just lifted above the hedgerows, casting long, slanting shadows across the lawn. A gardener was trimming hedges in the eastern corner, and a few drowsy bees floated lazily from bloom to bloom. The serenity was deceiving. Poirot joined me shortly after, impeccably dressed as always, his moustache precisely groomed, his gait unhurried. "Sleep well, Hastings?" he inquired mildly. I did, though I dare say the air here is full of more than just lavender. "Ah," he said, clasping his hands behind his back. "Even you feel it now. That is good. It means the atmosphere is thick with, how shall I say, emotional residue. Secrets do not remain dormant in such places, they radiate. We need only observe where the ripples break." Before I could question his meaning, we heard a sudden cry, a shrill, broken exclamation echoing from the garden's western end. Poirot's eyes narrowed. Without a word, he turned, and we hurried down the path. We arrived at the greenhouse, a long structure of iron and glass, half shaded by cypress and tangled with vine. Its door stood ajar. A sharp scent, earthy, tinged with something bitter, lingered in the air. Inside, crouched near a central table, was Mrs. Thorne, the housekeeper. Her hands trembled against her apron. In the centre of the room, slumped beside a shattered clay pot, lay Isadora Langford. The scene was horrifying in its stillness. One glove was half removed. Her hat lay askew. Her eyes were closed, the lines of her face now oddly softened. At her side was an overturned chair and a broken wine-coloured orchid, its petals crushed beneath her shoulder. Poirot knelt swiftly, placing 2 fingers to her throat. After a moment, he stood. "She is dead," he said gently. The household descended into confusion. Dr. Merrow arrived within minutes. After conducting a brief examination, he pronounced the death as likely cardiac arrest. "She must have come here early," he murmured, straightening his spectacles. "Perhaps to water her plants. She was fond of quiet hours." Poirot glanced around the greenhouse. The floor was swept, orderly. Watering cans stood aligned beneath the table. Rows of orchids, ferns and climbing vines lined the shelves, most healthy, but some curiously labelled with scribbled notes in Latin. Poirot's gaze lingered on a narrow shelf at the far end. He moved with precision, touching nothing but scanning everything. "Is it not odd, Hastings," he said, "that Madame Langford, who prided herself on routine, should begin her day with gardening in her plum silk and wearing gloves meant for the drawing room?" "You mean she wasn't here to tend to the plants?" "I mean," he said softly, "she was lured." At that moment, Colonel Ashcombe entered, demanding explanations. "What the devil's going on?" Agnes came rushing to the kitchen, shouting something about Isidora, dead. Poirot turned calmly. "I regret to confirm it. Madame Langford was found here, alone, moments ago." The Colonel's ruddy face turned pale beneath his sunburn. "In the greenhouse? This is damnably sudden." "Indeed. Dr. Merrow suspects heart failure. Do you concur?" Ashcombe looked at the body, then shook his head, slowly. "She wasn't ill, not in the way you mean. Stubborn, perhaps, but her mind was clear. She was only yesterday chastising Eleanor for overboiling the peas." Poirot inclined his head. "And yet here we are." An hour later, the family had assembled in the parlour. The local constable, summoned discreetly by Dr. Merrow, awaited confirmation that no foul play was suspected. Poirot, however, had already begun his quiet inquiry. "May I speak to Miss Eleanor Langford alone?" he asked. Eleanor entered the morning room a few minutes later. Her usual restraint was gone. Her eyes were rimmed with red, her cheeks pale. "I can't believe she's gone," she whispered. "It feels rehearsed, somehow, as if she planned it." "Why would you say that?" "She was, unusual these past days. She gave me a journal of hers, said I'd need it soon, and she kissed me before bed, which she hasn't done in years." Poirot studied her. "Tell me, mademoiselle, did your mother have any enemies?" Eleanor hesitated. "Enemies? Number but regrets? Yes, and secrets." "What sort of secrets?" She shook her head. "I don't know, but I suspect you will soon." Later that afternoon, Poirot and I returned to the greenhouse. It had been cordoned off, though the authorities had not ruled the death suspicious. Poirot paced the space with calculated care. "Do you smell it, Hastings?" I sniffed. "Earth, ferns, perhaps a faint chemical scent." "Just so. Something bitter, subtle, not natural to this collection. It was stronger this morning." He paused before the plant shelf. "One label is missing," he said, pointing to an empty stake beside a potted orchid. "Could it have fallen?" "Perhaps. Or perhaps it was removed deliberately. Orchids are fascinating, Hastings. Some are rare, others beautiful, and some deadly." He walked to the centre table where the broken pot lay. The soil had been swept slightly aside, by the fall or by a hand. Poirot lifted a fragment of ceramic with his handkerchief. "There is a residue here, powdery, greenish-white. I believe our dear doctor will find it interesting." He turned to me with that gleam I knew so well. "This was not heart failure, Hastings. This was orchestrated." We dined in sombre silence that evening. The Lavender Hour passed without ceremony. Eleanor remained in her room. Colonel Ashcombe drank heavily. Beatrix, subdued, sat with her camera untouched beside her. Dr. Merrow, composed but pale, maintained his role as comforter, speaking gently to Agnes and offering to manage funeral arrangements. Poirot said little during the meal, but I could see the calculations behind his eyes. Afterwards, in the study, he addressed me directly. "There is something very wrong here, Hastings. Madame Langford sensed her end and feared it. She called me not to investigate her death, but to prevent it. Alas, we were too late." He paced briefly. "There are 4 who had motive: the heir, the disinherited, the deceiver, and the watcher." "Who are they?" "You will see. For now, we must examine the will and the garden. Everything else will follow." Chapter 4. The Legacy and the Lie. The following morning arrived grey and windless, as if nature itself had paused in deference to the late Mrs. Isadora Langford. The garden that once brimmed with fragrance now felt unusually muted, and the usual rustle of birds in the cypress trees was eerily absent. Poirot and I breakfasted alone in the small conservatory. Outside, the lavender rose stood undisturbed, their purple heads bowed by dew. "She was a woman of foresight," Poirot murmured, folding his napkin. "Everything arranged with elegance, even her death, if you can believe it. But elegance, mon ami, can be a mask for precision, and precision often betrays intent." I poured the coffee. "Do you truly believe she was murdered, Poirot? The doctor was adamant it was natural." "Ah, but the doctor's opinion is only one piece of the puzzle. No, there are inconsistencies, contradictions. We shall begin, I think, with the will." At 10 o'clock, Mr. Gerald Quayle, the family solicitor, arrived in a grey motor car that seemed as upright and humourless as the man himself. He was tall, severely dressed, and carried a black leather folio under one arm. "I am here at the express instructions of Mrs. Langford," he said briskly. The contents of her latest testament were to be read immediately following her death, in the presence of the full household. We were summoned to the drawing room. Eleanor Langford sat nearest the window, pale and silent. Colonel Ashcombe, legs crossed defiantly, cradled a whisky glass despite the early hour. Beatrix Lorne stood beside the fireplace, arms folded, while Dr. Merrow remained just behind the sofa, unusually still. Quayle cleared his throat. "Mrs. Isadora Langford's revised will was executed 3 weeks ago. I shall read it in full, omitting only the formal preambles." He opened the folio, and his voice echoed in the high-ceilinged room. "To my housekeeper, Mrs. Agnes Thorne, I leave a monthly annuity and the use of the East Cottage for the remainder of her days. To Colonel Reginald Ashcombe, I leave a collection of my late husband's military memorabilia and the sum of £500. To Miss Beatrix Lorne, a dear family guest, I leave my collection of botanical volumes and sketchbooks in appreciation of her passion and spirit. To Dr. Felix Merrow, I leave the bronze sundial from the West Garden and a token of gratitude, my late husband's medical case. To my only daughter, Eleanor Langford, I leave the entirety of Lavender House, all its contents, and the residual estate." A silence followed. Colonel Ashcombe shifted in his chair. "Is that all?" he said stiffly. "It is," Quayle replied. "There is no codicil." Ashcombe's lips compressed. "I see." Poirot, seated just to my left, tilted his head. "This differs from her previous will, does it not, Monsieur Quayle?" The solicitor hesitated. "Yes. The previous version, filed 2 years ago, divided the estate evenly between Miss Langford and the Colonel. That draft was revoked." "Fascinating," Poirot said softly. After the reading, the Colonel stormed into the garden. I found him at the sundial 10 minutes later, scowling into the middle distance. "Quite the performance, that," he growled as I approached. "You're displeased?" "Displeased?" he snapped. "I devoted 15 years to this place, supported her through drought, repairs, and that damned flower competition nonsense, and now I'm left with sabres and a pittance. She's given everything to Eleanor, who's barely lifted a hand since she turned 20. "Poirot believes the will may be a clue," I ventured. The Colonel gave a grim smile. "Then your detective friend ought to dig deeper, because this isn't just a legal snub, it's personal." Poirot, meanwhile, had returned to the greenhouse. There, in the filtered light beneath the vine-strangled beams, he examined the shelves again with fastidious care. One shelf, he noted, bore a smudge of faded chalk markings, erased recently, perhaps hastily. A single clay pot stood empty beside it. Nearby, a trowel bore traces of disturbed earth and what looked like milky sap. Mrs. Thorne entered quietly, wiping her hands on her apron. "You're looking for something, sir?" "I look for many things, madame. One never knows what may be relevant." She moved to water a trailing fern. "It's a great sadness. Mrs. Langford was a creature of habit. I can't believe she'd come here dressed for company and take a fall like that. Precisely my thought, Poirot said. Tell me, did anyone else have access to this room in the morning? Only the gardener, Mr. Fuller, but he never enters uninvited, and Miss Eleanor comes sometimes, but only after breakfast. Poirot glanced at the orchid shelf. Has anything been moved recently? Mrs. Thorne hesitated. Now that you mention it, there was a glass jar here, a small one with a black lid. Mrs. Langford used it to store orchid paste. It's missing. That evening, Beatrix Lorne requested a word with Poirot in the orchard. I think I've done something terribly foolish, she admitted, clasping her camera nervously. Yesterday, during tea, I was photographing the spread. I rearranged some of the cordial glasses to get a better angle. I didn't think much of it then, but now... You fear you may have altered the course of events? Poirot asked gently. She nodded. If someone had poisoned a drink intended for someone else... Poirot's expression did not shift. You have done nothing wrong, mademoiselle. On the contrary, your honesty may be vital. Please, keep your negatives. I may ask to see them. As she departed, Poirot turned to me. You see, Hastings? It begins to unravel. The drink, the attire, the absence of a label, the missing jar, all threads that must be tied to motive. And now the question becomes, who benefited from Isadora's death, and who feared what she might reveal? That night, Poirot paced the drawing room in deliberate silence. Let us list them, he said at last. The Colonel, disinherited and furious. Eleanor, heir to a fortune, yet riddled with guilt. Dr. Merrow, long a friend, but curiously tight-lipped. And Beatrix, who rearranged the scene without knowing it, each with means, each with motive. I nodded. But who had the opportunity? Poirot stopped by the fireplace and looked toward the empty mantel. There was a lie spoken today, he said softly. A small one, but lies, Hastings, are like seeds. Given time, they bloom. He looked at his watch. Tomorrow we begin with Eleanor. The truth she hides may be the key to everything. Chapter 5. Lavender and Belladonna. The rain returned the following morning, delicate and persistent, pattering against the tall windows of Lavender House like 1,000 cautious fingers. Beneath the softened light, the estate appeared ghostly, its once vivid lavender beds now dulled to bruised purple. Poirot, immaculate in his navy suit with a pale cream cravat, stood at the window of our chamber, arms crossed. Belladonna, he said quietly. I looked up from my chair. What of it? He turned, his expression sharp. It is the missing piece. You recall the orchid shelf in the greenhouse, the residue on the broken pot, the bitter scent lingering in the air? Yes. Belladonna is not a true orchid, of course. It is a member of the nightshade family, but in the right dose, carefully prepared, it can mimic cardiac failure, dilated pupils, sudden collapse, and in cordial, nearly undetectable. You believe that's what was used? Poirot tapped a finger against his chin. I do. Madame Langford knew someone intended her harm. Why else would she summon me with such subtle urgency? She feared something, someone. The Lavendour Hour was not simply tradition, it was a stage. We were interrupted by a knock. It was Eleanor. Her pale features were drawn, but she entered with unexpected calm. You said you wished to speak with me. Poirot gestured for her to sit. Mademoiselle, he began, your mother made a remark the day before her death. She spoke of honesty, of transition. Do you know to what she referred? Eleanor looked away. She had secrets, many, but I believe she meant the truth about my father. Ah, Poirot said softly. The first Mr. Langford. He wasn't the man society believed him to be, she said quietly. He had debts, women, scandals that were quietly hushed. Mother covered for him until his death. She believed in preserving the family's name, but in her final years, I think the guilt of deception began to weigh on her. Poirot tilted his head. And you, mademoiselle? Did she confide in you? Not directly, But I found something, a page from her old journal. She'd torn it out and hidden it behind a botanical sketch in her room. It said only, "If Eleanor knew what I know, it would destroy her memory of him." "And yet," Poirot said gently, "you continued to care for her." Eleanor gave a fragile smile. She was not an easy woman, but she loved me in her own way. Poirot leaned forward. "Did you ever enter the greenhouse alone, particularly in the past week?" She hesitated. "Once or twice, to fetch her gloves or a sketchbook she left behind, but never for long." Poirot nodded slowly. "Thank you, mademoiselle. That will be all for now." When she had gone, he turned to me. "She is not lying, but she is not telling all. There is pain buried deep in that young woman, Hastings. And where there is pain, there may be motive." We made our way to the greenhouse once more. The rain had lightened to a whisper, and inside the air was warm and damp. Poirot knelt by the central table. "Look here, Hastings. The soil beneath this table is loose again. Someone returned after the death." I crouched. A shallow hollow had indeed been disturbed, then hastily refilled. Poirot retrieved a small metal trowel and dug with surgical precision. Within seconds, he struck something solid, a small glass jar capped in black, coated in fine dirt. He removed it with a handkerchief and held it up to the light. Inside, a thick, greenish-brown substance clung to the sides. "Orchid paste, ostensibly," he murmured. "But no orchid produces this color." "Belladonna?" I guessed. "Almost certainly. We shall let the police confirm it. But this, mon ami, is the weapon." At that moment, a sound startled us, a creak of the door, followed by a gasp. Beatrix Lorne stood on the threshold, hand to her mouth. I didn't mean to interrupt." "Come in, mademoiselle," Poirot said kindly. "You may be of assistance." Beatrix entered hesitantly. Her eyes flicked to the jar. "Is that what killed her?" "We believe so," Poirot replied. "You have a sharp eye. Tell me, was this shelf rearranged before or after the evening tea?" She frowned. "Before. I remember because I wanted to photograph the symmetry, but one pot seemed missing. It bothered me." "Missing how?" "There was a gap in the third row and a faint ring where a pot had been. I mentioned it to Eleanor, but she brushed it off." Poirot thanked her, and she left soon after. I looked at him. "You're thinking it was prepared in advance?" "Yes. The poison was extracted and hidden, but someone returned to bury it once the deed was done." "Dr. Merrow?" "Perhaps. Or the person who feared suspicion most." That afternoon, Poirot summoned Mrs. Thorne to the study. "You have served this house a long time," he said. "You knew Mrs. Langford's routines, her allies, her enemies." The housekeeper's lips thinned. "She made more enemies than she realized, especially after she changed that will." "You knew she had done so?" She hesitated. "She told me in confidence, said she owed her daughter everything after what she'd concealed." "About her husband?" "Yes. He wasn't the man the world thought he was. She knew, eventually. And I think she feared that secret coming out would ruin Eleanor." Poirot folded his hands. "You also said earlier you saw someone near the greenhouse that night. You weren't sure who." "I still aren't. But I can tell you something else. That jar you found? I washed it last Thursday. When I put it back, it was empty. Someone must have taken it since." "Merci, madame." After supper, Poirot conducted a quiet survey of the household's belongings with their reluctant permission. In Colonel Ashcombe's room, he found nothing but uniform neatness and an old war revolver. Dr. Merrow's cases were tidy, his books arranged by subject. Beatrix's trunk, full of photographic equipment, held nothing unusual, but in Eleanor's writing desk, beneath a false bottom, Poirot discovered a faded letter. It was unsigned, but the ink was familiar. Inside were words that chilled even me. "She cannot be allowed to alter it. She cannot be permitted to destroy what remains." If she does, everything will unravel, and you will lose her forever. Do what must be done. The hour is nearly here." Poirot read it twice, then folded it with reverence. "She did not write this," he said at last, "but she received it. And that means someone else knew of the will change and felt threatened enough to act." As we prepared for bed, Poirot stood at the window once more. "The game narrows," he murmured. "Two possibilities, one who hoped for fortune and was denied, and one who stood to gain only silence." I frowned. "Then tomorrow?" "Tomorrow," he said, "we plant our trap, and we see who flinches when the Lavendour Hour is relived." Chapter 6. Suspicions take root. A stiff breeze swept through Lavender House the following morning, rattling the panes in the parlour windows and stirring the lavender fields into ghostly murmurs. Though the weather had cleared, the mood inside remained overcast. The household had shifted into something brittle, each smile too quick, each silence too long. Poirot stood by the fireplace, arms folded, regarding the ornate mantel clock as it ticked towards 9. His demeanour was placid, but I recognized the signs. He was preparing for something. "I have requested each member of the household to speak with me today," he said. "Individually in the drawing room. It is time to shake the tree, Hastings, and observe what falls." "Suspects?" Poirot nodded. "All 4, Colonel Ashcombe, Dr. Merrow, Miss Eleanor, and Mademoiselle Beatrix. Each possesses motive, means, or knowledge. One, perhaps more than one, harbours guilt." The first to arrive was Colonel Ashcombe, his military stride losing none of its defiance. He seated himself heavily and lit a cigarette, which he smoked in curt, silent drags. Poirot regarded him evenly. "Colonel, let us speak plainly. You expected to inherit a significant portion of Lavendour House, did you not?" Ashcombe's jaw tightened. "Yes, I did. Isadora and I had an understanding, or so I thought." "And yet she altered her will 3 weeks ago. Did you know of this?" "No," he snapped. "She never said a word, but I knew something was wrong. She was distant, cautious, avoided discussing the estate." "Were you aware of her morning habits in the greenhouse?" He shrugged. "Only that she liked her orchids. Never understood it myself. Fiddling with petals and pollen. Pointless business." Poirot narrowed his eyes. "You were seen walking towards the greenhouse 3 days ago, just after dusk." The Colonel hesitated, then scoffed. "I left my cigarette case on the sundial. Went to retrieve it, that's all." Poirot offered a faint smile. "Curious that no cigarette case was found?" Ashcombe stood abruptly. "If you're accusing me, say so." "I accuse no one. I merely listen." Dr. Felix Merrow arrived next, composed as always, though his collar was faintly rumpled, and his eyes bore the strain of sleeplessness. "Dr. Merrow," Poirot began, "you were present during the Lavendour Hour, yes?" "I was seated with Mrs. Langford. She was, well, animated even. No sign of distress until the next morning." "You were her physician for many years. Did she ever exhibit symptoms consistent with heart failure?" "Number on the contrary, she was remarkably strong for her age." Poirot leaned forward. "You are familiar with the properties of Atropa Belladonna?" A flicker passed over Merrow's face. "Of course. Deadly nightshade, causes blurred vision, hallucinations, cardiac irregularities." "Why?" "A jar of paste was found buried in the greenhouse, its contents consistent with belladonna extract." Merrow sat very still. "You think she was poisoned?" "I believe she was." "And you think I think you knew how such a poison could be administered without detection. Tell me, doctor, did you ever advise her to reduce her cordial intake?" Merrow paused. "She drank it daily. I did suggest moderation once. She ignored me." Poirot nodded slowly. "Merci, doctor. That will be all for now." Beatrix Lorne entered shortly after, dressed in an olive cardigan and muddy boots. Her camera dangled at her hip, though today it seemed more a burden than a companion. "You said I might be of help," she offered, seating herself on the edge of the sofa. "Indeed," Poirot replied warmly. You are observant. You moved the cordial glasses before the Lavendour Hour. Do you recall anything else unusual? She frowned, thinking. Yes, I noticed Eleanor had a headache. She rubbed her temples before the toast, and when I handed her a glass, she switched it, said she preferred one with less cordial. Switched with whose? I think with her mother's. They were similar, but I remember because I'd moved the plate of raspberry tartlets, and it confused her. Poirot was still. You are certain? Yes. So the poisoned glass, if such it was, may have been intended for Eleanor. Beatrix blinked. You think Eleanor was the target? It is a possibility, one that must be explored. Finally, Eleanor Langford returned, her hair pinned back, her dress a simple navy. She sat down with a weary grace. Mademoiselle, Poirot said gently, did you know your mother changed her will? She looked surprised. Number, she never told me. She left you everything. Eleanor swallowed. I didn't ask for it. I don't want it. Poirot studied her. Do you recall switching glasses during the tea? She hesitated. Yes. Mine was too strong. I traded with hers. Then perhaps the poison was not meant for her. Her eyes widened. You think someone meant to kill me? Poirot nodded and failed. She exhaled, her shoulders sagging. I suspected something, but I thought I was imagining it, the way she looked at me lately as if something terrible had been decided. Your father, Poirot said quietly. There is more to the story, is there not? Yes? She looked away. I learned recently that he was involved in affairs, unsavory ones. He borrowed money from people he shouldn't have. Mother paid them off, but she never forgave him or herself. And someone else knew of this secret? She met his eyes. Dr. Merrow. He helped cover one incident up. I overheard them years ago. Poirot rose. Merci, mademoiselle. You have been brave. That evening, Poirot and I stood once more in the lavender garden, the sky above us darkening into shades of amethyst and blue. The shadows lengthen, Hastings, he said, and yet our picture sharpens. You think Eleanor was the intended victim? I do. Consider, she inherits all. Her mother's death elevates her, and yet she was the one to switch glasses unexpectedly. The poisoner had no way of predicting it. Dr. Merrow, then? Poirot pursed his lips. He had access, knowledge, and motive. If Eleanor discovered the truth, she might cut him off, or worse, expose his past. But what of the Colonel? He expected wealth. He received insult. His anger is genuine, but he lacks subtlety. This crime, if crime it is, required finesse. And Beatrix? Poirot smiled faintly. Ah, Mademoiselle Beatrix, she has stirred the scene, but unintentionally. She provides clarity, not confusion. I nodded. So what now? Now, he said, we set the stage once more. Tomorrow evening we shall reenact the Lavendour Hour. Same setting, same glasses, same guests, and we shall observe. For in moments of repetition, my friend, the truth struggles to remain concealed. Chapter 7. The Night Reenacted. It was just past 6 in the evening when Hercule Poirot made his request. I must trouble you all, he said with careful courtesy, to return to the garden this evening, just as you did the night Madame Langford passed. The chairs, the tea tray, the cordial, all must be arranged as they were. Colonel Ashcombe raised a grizzled brow. You mean to perform a parlour trick, Poirot? Non, Poirot replied smoothly. I mean to recreate a moment of truth. Sometimes, when the actors take their positions once more, they reveal their parts. Unwittingly. Dr. Merrow, arms folded, said nothing. Eleanor looked visibly uneasy. Only Beatrix offered a quick, curious nod. At precisely 7 o'clock, the household reassembled in the lavender garden. The sky glowed with a soft lilac hue, the lavender hour once again. The scent of the fields was thick, clinging to the folds of our clothing like invisible lace. Mrs. Thorne had prepared the table exactly as before. The porcelain cups stood neatly in a semicircle, the decanter of elderflower cordial glistening with condensation. A small bell rested beside the tartlets, untouched. Poirot stood at the head of the table, his gaze sweeping each face. "You will indulge me," he began, "in drinking as you did that evening. Sit where you sat. Take the same glasses in the same order. We shall toast as Madame Langford did." A pause. Then slowly each guest took their place. Beatrix to the left, near the lavender hedge. Eleanor beside her mother's vacant chair. The Colonel near the sundial. Dr. Merrow at the end of the row, arms behind his back, his face expressionless. Poirot moved deliberately, lifting the decanter and pouring equal amounts into each glass. Madame Langford always drank hers sweetened, no? Mademoiselle Eleanor, you switched with her that night, did you not? She nodded faintly. Poirot placed 2 identical glasses before her. Then switch again as you did before. She obeyed. Poirot waited. Then, "To honesty," he said softly. The guests repeated it, quiet, hesitant. He watched their expressions. The Colonel's jaw clenched. Beatrix blinked rapidly. Eleanor's lips parted as if to speak, then closed. But it was Dr. Merrow who shifted his weight slightly and glanced, not at his own glass, but at Eleanor's. Poirot saw it. "Merci," he said. "You may relax. The performance, as they say, is complete." Back in the drawing room, Poirot turned to the assembled party. "Now," he said, "I shall speak." He stood beneath the great oil portrait of Isidora Langford's father, hands clasped at his chest, his voice calm but firm. Madame Langford was murdered, not by accident, not by chance. She was poisoned, most cleverly, with a diluted tincture of Atropa belladonna derived from the belladonna plant. The symptoms mimicked natural failure. The poison was administered in her drink, her cordial, at the hour she always took it. A stunned silence. Poirot continued. But the intended victim was not Madame Langford. It was her daughter, Eleanor. Gasps followed. Eleanor went pale. She switched glasses at the last moment, unwittingly sparing herself. The poisoner, believing her mother would insist upon her usual glass, miscalculated. He turned to Beatrix. "You confirmed the switch, mademoiselle. An innocent gesture, but one that derailed the entire plan." Beatrix looked startled, but nodded. I didn't know it mattered." Poirot smiled gently. "You saved a life." Now he turned to the fireplace, where Dr. Merrow stood still, his hands clasped behind him, like a schoolmaster awaiting judgment. "You knew the properties of belladonna. You recognized the symptoms. You had access to the greenhouse and knowledge of the missing jar. You were the only one trusted enough not to be questioned." Merrow gave a short, derisive laugh. "You can't be serious." "Oh, but I am," said Poirot. "You once had a relationship with Eleanor. Years ago, before her mother intervened. But there was another obstacle, was there not? A marriage in France you had failed to dissolve. Madame Langford discovered this. She ended your prospects but kept your secret." He stepped closer. "When she decided to change her will to grant everything to Eleanor, you realized the risk. With her death, Eleanor would inherit and, you hoped, forgive you. But the truth you feared was not Eleanor's judgment, it was hers. So you planned to eliminate the one person who could expose you." Merrow's eyes glittered. "You have no proof." "Ah," Poirot said softly, "but I do." He opened his hand to reveal the letter, the one Eleanor had hidden, written by someone desperate. This letter, Poirot said, was sent anonymously to Eleanor. It warned her not to trust her mother's decision. Its tone was protective, but beneath it was a directive. "Do what must be done. It was you, Doctor. You wrote it." Merrow said nothing. Poirot turned to the others. He believed Eleanor would drink the cordial, but Beatrix's rearrangement caused the fatal glass to pass to Madame Langford instead. He paused. After the murder, he returned to the greenhouse and buried the jar, evidence of the poison. We found it. With your fingerprints. Still, Merrow stood motionless. Poirot stepped back. You are clever, Doctor, but you underestimated two things: a young woman's intuition and a mother's capacity for sacrifice. There was a long silence. Then Eleanor spoke. I should have seen it, she whispered. He kept asking me about the will. He told me Mother was manipulating me. Poirot placed a hand on her shoulder. Your mother died protecting you, and now justice will honor that. The constable, summoned earlier, stepped forward. Merrow did not resist. He followed without a word. Later that evening, the lavender fields were once again bathed in soft violet. The air felt lighter, still laced with grief, but no longer stifled by suspicion. Poirot and I stood in the west garden, watching the first stars appear. You knew before tonight, I said. Didn't you? Poirot nodded. Not fully, but I suspected. His composure was too perfect, and he was always watching Eleanor, never her mother. And now? Poirot looked toward the house. Now Mademoiselle Eleanor must begin again, with truth and perhaps peace. He turned to me. You see, Hastings, murder often begins not with hatred but with fear, the fear of losing something: control, love, legacy. The bell in the garden chimed faintly in the breeze, as though echoing the end of an old hour and the beginning of something new. Chapter 8. The Lavendour Revelation. The morning after the arrest, Lavendour House stood unusually still. No footsteps echoed down the staircase, no china clinked in the breakfast room, no soft murmur of conversation rose through the corridors. The lavender fields lay quietly beneath a veil of mist, their rose washed pale in the morning dew. Poirot and I took our tea in the small morning parlour, the same room where Lady Isidora had once read her journals in the hour before dusk. Her chair by the window remained empty. Her presence, though gone, lingered in the folds of the curtains, the faint scent of rosewater in the air, and the unfinished page torn from her diary. Poirot sipped thoughtfully, his eyes not on the garden, but on the gilded teacup in his hands. You see, Hastings, he said at last, this was a murder born not of hatred, but of concealment, of a man so fearful of exposure he chose to strike preemptively and struck the wrong woman. Dr. Merrow's plan hinged on certainty, I agreed, but life is rarely so orderly. Just so, Poirot said, setting down his cup. He counted on Eleanor obeying her mother, on a cordial glass remaining untouched, on the strength of tradition to conceal innovation. But the smallest change, a photograph, a gesture, a glass moved by instinct, unwound it all. There was a knock at the door. It was Eleanor. She entered quietly, no longer wearing the dark colours of grief, but a soft grey shawl over cream muslin. Her face was pale, but there was calmness in her step. I wanted to thank you, she said, and to ask how you knew. Poirot gestured to the seat across from him. I knew many things, mademoiselle, he said gently, but I suspected long before I could confirm. Dr. Merrow's knowledge, his poise, his carefully placed helpfulness, these are admirable traits in a physician, but dangerous when misused. Eleanor nodded. He convinced me for years that he was loyal to our family, that he cared about me. Poirot inclined his head. He did care, once, but fear changes care into control. Your mother discovered the truth about his past, his marriage in France, the false name under which he practiced. She allowed him to stay silent until she changed her will. Then he saw the future slipping away. You, free from his influence, might uncover it all. Eleanor's eyes shimmered. And so he planned to kill me. Poirot's voice remained steady. He assumed the cordial would pass as usual. He did not count on your modesty or Beatrix's rearrangement of the table. She looked down. I keep wondering, if I hadn't switched glasses, if I hadn't paused for the tartlets, would I be alive? Poirot reached for her hand. Your mother's love protected you, Even in her death, she left you the strength to face the truth. Eleanor sat quietly for a long time. She was difficult, she said at last. Proud, distant, but she was never cruel, and she never gave up on honor. Poirot nodded. She preserved dignity until the end, and that, mademoiselle, is a legacy greater than property. Eleanor rose. I've decided to stay at Lavendour House, to reopen the garden conservatory, make it a place of study. She loved her plants, even if one proved her undoing. Poirot smiled. You will bring life where death once lingered. That is most fitting. As she left, he turned to me. You see, Hastings, our work is not only to punish, it is to repair. That afternoon, Poirot and I took a final walk through the lavender rows. The wind had picked up, sending ripples across the purple sea, and the bees had resumed their low, contented hum. I keep thinking of the others, I said. Ashcombe, Beatrix, even Mrs. Thorne. They all had reason to distrust, but none acted. Poirot adjusted his gloves. Suspicion is not guilt. Motive without method is mere resentment. Dr. Merrow had all three: motive, method, and occasion. The rest, pawns in his quiet theatre. We paused at the sundial, its bronze face dulled by weather, its shadow cast toward the orchard, the gift Dr. Merrow had inherited from the will. Do you remember, Poirot said, how it was he who suggested managing the funeral arrangements? I nodded. A useful diversion, he said. Busy hands attract less scrutiny, but the small things give him away. The moment he glanced at Eleanor's cup during our reenactment, the buried jar, the false humility. The truth, as always, is in the details. Poirot gazed across the garden. I shall write to Madame Langford's solicitor. Her journals must be preserved, not for gossip, but for truth. Let those pages show that even secrets, when held with dignity, can protect more than they harm. Before we left the estate, Beatrix Lorne found us in the courtyard. I'm heading back to Cambridge, she said. But I've decided to develop the negatives from that night. Not just for evidence, but to exhibit. Poirot raised a brow. Lavendour Hour, she explained. As a study in contrast, light and shadow, the moment between beauty and betrayal. Poirot gave a small bow, a poetic conclusion to a deadly performance. She smiled. Strange how something meant for death became a turning point. I think your presence changed more than you realize, Monsieur Poirot. Sometimes, he said, a single step in the right direction leaves the longest trail. She looked down at her camera. I captured something else, too. A photo I took just after the switch. You can see Eleanor's hand holding the cup. She handed it to Poirot. It's yours, for your files. Poirot held it delicately. Merci, mademoiselle. You may have caught the very second the course of fate changed. She smiled and left. We departed Lavendour House just before twilight. As our car turned down the long gravel path, I glanced back at the estate, the ivy climbing its brick walls, the glass house glinting in the last light, and the lavender swaying like silent sentinels. Poirot adjusted his hat and leaned back. A case like this, Hastings, it does not clamour, it whispers. The poison lies not only in the cup, but in the years that precede it. The unspoken grudge, the buried truth, the fear of being revealed. And yet, I said, a simple switch, almost an accident, undid it all. Poirot gave a knowing smile. Ah, mais oui, the smallest act, Hastings, becomes the grandest solution. Madame Langford feared death, yet faced it with grace, and in doing so she gave her daughter not only a second chance, but a path to freedom. He looked once more at the photo in his hand. To the hour when light fades, he murmured, and to what follows when the truth at last is allowed to bloom.